there. Welcome to First Jobs Matter, Innovating College to Career. My name is Melissa Korn. I'm a reporter at the Wall Street Journal. And we have with us, to my left, Michelle Weise, Chief Innovation Officer at Strada Institute for the Future of Work, Michael Sorrell, President of Paul Quinn College, and Bridget Burns, Executive Director of the University Innovation Alliance. Quick housekeeping note, we are going to do Q&A live in the room, as well as on the Slido app. You can go slido.com or on the app. The event is SXSW EDU. You can also do it on the South by app. We are in room 12AB for asking questions, and we'll get to the questions a little bit later in the session. So I'm going to start with a kind of fun, softball-ish question, and get a sense of what everybody's first job was out of college, because we're talking here about first jobs and how those lead you into careers. So, Michelle?
Hi, everyone. My first job was as a second grade teacher in Harlem. I had moved to New York 2 weeks before 9/11. The charter school I worked for closed, and then I became a tennis teaching pro.
Yeah, I can't top that. I actually didn't get my first job until I went to graduate school. So I went straight from college to graduate school. But in between graduate school and law school, I was the statewide Community Reinvestment Act coordinator for the North Carolina Legal Services. So I spent a year negotiating agreements between economic development corporations and banks. And just to show you how influential those jobs can be, completely changed my worldview. I was going to law school because I wanted to be a civil rights attorney because I idolized Thurgood Marshall and Charles Hamilton Houston. And I thought that court and the law was the best way to affect change. That year doing economic development work taught me that it's really about providing people economic opportunities to feed their families, to live their lives, that you can affect change that way. You can sustainably change people's lives. And that is the worldview that I've taken with me going forward.
So, well, now I feel like I really have to step it up. So like a lot of low-income or first-generation college students, college was very transformational for me. But it was, for me, it wasn't necessarily things happening in the classroom, it was outside the classroom. So I was a student body president, and I was also on the State Board of Higher Education. So as a result, when I transitioned after my master's, my first job was a policy and research associate for the Oregon University system, which I would not have had those opportunities if I hadn't been so aggressive about my extracurriculars.
For me, too, the extracurriculars were huge. I went straight from undergrad to grad to journalism, and it was because of my student newspaper that really got me going there. So I'm going to set the stage here with some numbers and some data that I know that you all will dig into as we have our discussion. But it's good to get a sense of where things stand in terms of the college to career transition. UCLA's Higher Education Research Institute, for their latest senior survey, 38% of respondents strongly agreed that college prepared them for their career. 38%. NACE's 2017-18 Career Service Benchmark Survey, the median career services staff is 3 professionals and 1 clerical worker, and that's been flat for 5 years. And then something that I know Michelle will speak a little bit more about, Strada and Burning Glass found last year that 43% of graduates are underemployed in their first jobs, and of those, 2/3 remain in jobs that don't require degrees 5 years later. So students are underwhelmed by career services support, landing in jobs that don't require credentials that they likely paid thousands or tens of thousands of dollars to get. So that's all a problem. I think we'd be in agreement. The good news is a lot of schools are working to better integrate career services and academics and extracurricular activities, and figuring out ways to make coursework and campus life more relevant to the work world. With that in mind, let's begin. So Michelle, talk a little bit, if you can, about the handoff from college to career. What damage can occur from that failure to launch?
Yeah, so there's clearly a lot of anxiety, which you pointed out. We've also done some surveying across about 300,000 Americans aged 18 to 65. And out of those currently enrolled students, 36% also say that they do not feel prepared for the workforce. 40% of liberal arts grads don't believe that their major will lead to a good job. And the thing is, they're onto something, because we've also been able to link it to the fact that they do often land jobs that don't require that college credential. And it's not just some sort of short-term small bump in the road. It actually ends up persisting for much longer than we had anticipated. Once you actually start off underemployed, you're 5 times more likely to remain underemployed 5 years out, and 3/4 of that group actually remained underemployed 10 years out. So underemployment is not just some sort of blip. It is something that we have to think about as a potential permanent detour. And so how do we better launch students into good first jobs? It's something that we can't just sort of say, well, we're going to teach learners how to learn for a lifetime. It's okay if their first job is not so great. They'll find their footing soon. Well, if we know that learners are not actually finding their footing, 5 or 10 years out, we need to be much more proactive on the front end of the learning experience.
And what are schools getting wrong in preparing the current crop of students for the workforce of today or tomorrow? Is it what they're teaching? Is it how it's being taught? Is it integration between academic and extracurricular activities? It's kind of for anyone.
I mean, how much time do you have? Well, I mean, one of the top lines is not involving faculty and career readiness at all, but I would just say, back to your earlier question, it's the word handoff is really important. There hasn't been an intentionally designed handoff. We think that by bolting on a career services office, disrespecting it, underfunding it, not taking it seriously, shoving it in a basement somewhere, that students are gonna somehow, through osmosis, get everything that we wish they would to prepare themselves. But the truth is, what we do is we rush them to graduation, and then we're like, oh yeah, by the way, stop by and get your resume looked at, and then we're gonna call you 2 weeks later for a donation. I mean, it's insane. We actually need to intentionally design a handoff so that we are integrating the curriculum experience and what will prepare you for the workforce, and it's a seamless transition. And I would argue that that doesn't exist right now. Our campuses are undertaking a redesign process to actually create that, and I know others are, but I would just argue that it's the lack of a handoff. It's the lack of taking it seriously and intentionally and acting like it was just something that was gonna happen just by having an office of 3 people.
Yeah, I would tell you the whole thing's broken, right? I mean, let's just stop and think about this for a moment, right? So first of all, how at an institution with 35, 40,000 people are you supposed to find a path forward? How many students have the ability to stand up and say, hey, I need help, and I'm going to compete with 39,000 other people to get that help? That discourages them, right? And so we're pushing this whole concept of bigger is better, and sometimes bigger is just more profitable for the people that are counting the checks. What students need is a smaller, more intentional environment that actually sees them, that listens to them, that understands them. The reason we came up with the urban work college model is because we actually knew our students, right? I mean, I have town hall meetings at least twice a semester, and we ask questions. How are you? What are you struggling with? Right?
And for those who don't know, give a little description of what the urban work college model is.
Sure. So at Paul Quinn College, we thought that higher ed wasn't working, and we just created our own version of higher ed. All right. So the urban work college model is just this. If you come to Paul Quinn College, you get a job. Okay? And we don't ask you to go find it. We find it for you. Because the data is very clear. 80% of all college students today are working more than 20, 25 hours a week. Okay? But they're working in jobs that aren't related to their majors. They're just working in jobs that help them get through. So the best paying jobs are the ones that have the worst hours, the hardest labor, and are least compatible with your academic environment. We got tired of watching students who are working the midnight shifts because they could get $15, $16 an hour and then fail their classes. Because if you work the midnight shift, you may physically show up for your 8 o'clock class, but you are not in your 8 o'clock class. And more often than not, you're not even physically in your 8 o'clock class. So we help our students get jobs. They work about 16 hours per week. We only hold classes on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Tuesdays and Thursdays, the students just go to work. So they get to work 8-hour shifts, so they're not asked to try and juggle getting back to campus between that. On top of that, we cut tuition and fees by $10,000 so that we can make it possible for students to be able to graduate with $10,000 of debt if they selected that option. Then the students work on campus for about a year, maybe 2 years, while we train them. Because 80% of our students are Pell Grant eligible. And look, if you're Pell Grant eligible, that means your family has had long-term unemployment or long-term underemployment, and you wouldn't know how to navigate the internship path, right? So let's help them. Let's not make people feel as if there's something wrong with them because they don't have that access to those resources. Then you graduate to off-campus corporate assignments where you get an opportunity to work in a corporate environment 2 to 3 years before you actually show up in one, which creates a competitive advantage for you. You get to learn the environment, learn what works, what doesn't work, so you have a chance to be more successful. Again, the way you pay for it, $6,100 is your Pell Grant. That's what we tie tuition to. Everyone who comes gets a $5,000 work college scholarship, and then that's your starting financial aid award. So of the $15,000, $16,000 we charge, you show up and $11,000 or $12,000 is already taken care of when you get there. In addition to that, we have something called reality-based education. Every course requires you to write papers. Every course requires you to give public speeches. Every course requires you to do group projects. And every course requires you to demonstrate digital mastery. And then the third piece of our platform is each semester you acquire some type of digital certificate. So by the time you graduate from Paul Quinn, you have an academic transcript, you have a work transcript, and then you have 4 to 8 digital certificates that allow you to navigate whatever is going on at the pace of change in society. We think we have poverty-proofed higher education.
So one of the interesting things about just what you're talking about is that you are building into the Paul Quinn College model a way of reducing so many of the frictions that exist, right? And you're giving learners visibility into potential trajectories for themselves. And I don't think we do a great job of helping our learners understand, actually, if you major in this, here are the 10 most promising pathways that you can expect for yourself. And if you want to move into these directions and you build in some work-based learning opportunity, you better be able to translate your skills. Like a lot of the stuff you're talking about are ways of translating your liberal arts competencies into the language of the workforce. Our two languages do not speak to one another. They are just two completely different languages. So we need to be able to use, the good news is we do have better data now. We actually have access to real-time labor market data where we can actually see where graduates are landing in the workforce and be able to connect them to those pathways and say, listen, if you are thinking about going into, if you're majoring in journalism, your example is actually perfect for right now.
I was an English and history major, but,
okay.
I majored in student newspaper.
So if you had some sense that you wanted to move into journalism, today, if a learner is thinking about going into journalism, that person better be very well aware that journalism has become an IT field. You have to be able to be comfortable with doing data visualization. You have to do some web design. You need to be comfortable with all kinds of IT skills that may not be foregrounded in our learning experiences today because our professors aren't necessarily aware of how that labor market has changed. So if we can bring some of that data down to the instructors and marry them with career services, we can say, actually, if you're thinking about going into communications, you better know how to talk about storytelling, search engine optimization, brand management, these sorts of things that will make you more marketable for that job one.
And one other thing that I forgot to mention, we actually have gotten rid of the language of career services. We created an Office of Prestigious Opportunities, okay? Because if you are dealing with students who have to be reprogrammed to think about themselves as individuals who deserve prestigious opportunities, and your career is your gateway to prestigious opportunities. So let's just change the entire narrative. And we do everything from, we even are now intentionally identifying and preparing students for things like Rhodes Scholarships, right? And because we thought, why should the only schools that produce those individuals consistently be the top 20 schools? There's nothing magical about it. What they do is they have an office, they identify students they think they can coach up to those opportunities, and then they coach them up. So we do that, and then we keep coaching for career opportunities, for everything. It's the Office of Prestigious Opportunities. And you should see the difference it has made in our students. It went from a place that people didn't want to go, right, to now they're sort of like, can I come see the Office of Prestigious Opportunities? Can I have a prestigious opportunity? Yes, you can. All right.
Bridget, you looked like you were going to say something.
Well, I just, so our campuses are engaging in a project called Bridging the Gap Between Education and Employment. The team is here in the back, and they're supported by Strata Education Network. And what we're doing is trying to unpack how we're messing this up. We are process mapping on all our campuses. You know, instead of just getting defensive and saying, no, our degrees are good. No, our graduates do well, because that's all that happens when people hear criticism, is they get really defensive individually, and then the public is like not believing us. And so we're mapping out how bad it really is, and then we're also involving those folks, those career services folks, et cetera, and across the campus in design sprints to reimagine the possibilities based on what's actually happening. And one of the things they found from process mapping that has just really struck me, and we're finding it's true across campuses, is when we survey students, we ask them, how did career services prepare you? And then when we mapped out all the functions people perceive to be career services related, they're not. The vast majority the career services office has no control over them whatsoever. So not only are we not even asking the question of how did your university prepare you for your career, but we're also setting up this office to fail. We're holding them accountable for something they have actually no responsibility for, no ability to influence. So I would say that in general, we need to just take a hard look in the mirror and create a space for us to have some of these uncomfortable conversations and reimagine the possibilities, because students deserve us actually taking this seriously instead of just getting defensive and saying, no, there's no weeds here.
That's what's cool. That's what's cool about the schools in the UIA, right? Like, I mean, they will ask those questions and try and solve them, right? And that, if all of our large publicly funded institutions behave that way, it would be a radically different experience.
So as you think through what those problems are, what those frictions are, what those challenges are, I'm going to go to one of the questions that we have on Slido here. What does an effective, intentionally designed college-to-career program look like? Do you have examples of successful models or frameworks?
So we're literally,
Don't know yet.
we're doing this in real time. And so the design sprints are coming up with prototypes right now, and then we're sharing them across the campuses. But I would say that there's quite a bit of rethinking that this all needs to start from day one. From the very beginning, the idea that this needs to be a hat on the edge, on the end of your educational experience is not it's not a serious answer. And so trying to figure out how we integrate the career readiness proficiencies into the classroom. How do you make things, one of the prototype ideas that's being floated is about making every single course have experiential learning in it. So it's really about, I would say it's never going to be enough to have an office somewhere that makes you feel okay about having an office there, right? Like the idea that we have an office for career services makes us feel good about ourselves, so we don't have to think about the hard question that we struggle with acknowledging, that what we do in education has a relationship with careers. Like the fact that we refuse to admit that students come to us because they want a job, and that somehow that's less academic and less rigorous and less researchy, and we have this like identity crisis that we need to reconcile. So I would say there are a lot of different models they're coming up with. It's happening in real time. I would argue it's just not having an office that is underfunded and disrespected and not taken seriously, and expecting them to carry the bulk of the burden of career readiness for thousands of students.
I think it also is potentially more fundamental in terms of just the way in which we scaffold learning today. So career services, completely agree, they're marginalized in multiple ways, and they're not integrated into the curriculum in a way that's productive and constructive. The other thing is as we look at the future of work, and a lot of the literature that is talking about the skills that are sort of most in demand to be able to thrive in that future of work, it comes to critical thinking, systems thinking. We are looking for nimble people who are able to exercise judgment in the most ambiguous of circumstances. That is what employers are looking for as they encounter issues, as they're coordinating more with robots and computers. In order to do that, we have to be building in that kind of adaptability, resilience, and ability to think across domains in a way that we are not doing today. If we think about the way that we keep everything in departmental silos that tend to function as different kinds of fiefdoms that don't actually push collaboration, we are not building these real-world learning experiences where people are able to understand how they apply their learning in different contexts. I think that's why we've seen the rise of competency-based education, is because we're trying to understand how do you apply your knowledge into can-do statements. This is what Stephen Kosslyn tried to do, right, at the Minerva Project, is think about the application of knowledge into different fields. But because we are not great at near and far transfer. We are not good at learning one thing in this math class and being able to understand how that actually crosses silos and connects to chemistry, connects to physics, connects to anthropology, because we silo them all.
So who is that on to help students understand and translate, well, I learned this in this class, and here's why that makes me qualified for job X, or, I was a sociology major, therefore I'm going to be unemployed, versus I was a sociology major, I did group projects, I learned how to do this, I gained these skills, I understand ambiguity and data, things like that.
Well, so I think this strikes at a power dynamic in our institutions, right? So I believe in shared governance. I just think you have to share it with more people than the faculty, right? So you're asking the faculty that studied one part of one area to all of a sudden design interdisciplinary systems like that would never work.
These are often faculty who have spent their entire lives in academia, not in practice.
Right. And then, so the way we look at it, we think you have to engage the marketplace immediately, right? I mean, so we live in a world where we consistently ask the question, what else do our students need to know? Are they good enough? Where are they struggling? How do we help them address those deficiencies? And listen, sometimes the answers hurt our feelings, right? I mean, they are depressing. And then you shake your head and you realize it's not about you, right? It's about them. And you go back to the drawing board and you design something else that works. And we have to, there's a fundamental concept that we believe at Paul Quinn, and that is no problem will ever again be permanently solved. And we adhere to that principle because we want to be forced into understanding that we have to keep asking the question, what if we're wrong? And how do we become better? Because it helps our students perform better. We are the stewards of their dreams, and it's just not good enough to be good enough.
You asked whose responsibility is, and I think it's the university, the leadership's responsibility to take seriously the process of inviting and encouraging faculty to be involved in the career readiness pathway, and the process. Because if you assume people are lazy or they don't care, they are not going to help you. If you take seriously the process of learning about what their challenges are and why this isn't happening and really unpack it, empathy is always the first step. I guarantee you will find that there is something in there that we can unpack and we can redesign to actually make it so it's fulfilling, it's rewarding, and it doesn't compromise all the other things we're asking them to do. I mean, at what point in the tenure process do we even think about this topic? We don't. And so I just think blaming and pointing fingers does not actually solve anything, but inviting people to be a part of the solution does.
I very rarely refer to press releases, but this one struck me. It's actually from the announcement last week that Strata was giving UIA $2.4 million grant to study the college to career transition. Thank you. And it's from Ed Ray, the president of Oregon State. I'm going to read it. He said that their school's participation, quote, reflects a belief that translating education into economic opportunity is absolutely central to our mission. And that goes to this being just part of what a school is supposed to do, not just teaching people in a vacuum, but relating it to what comes after. So I want to ask, what happens if the students don't necessarily know what they want to be doing after? how can schools help students prepare for careers when they don't know what they want their first job or their career to be, whether it's by industry or, I want this exact role?
So that's where actually data can play a role, is that we know that there are just going to be certain opportunities when someone's about to graduate that they don't have the career pathway in front of them that they really want to pursue. It's maybe not available to them. We at least know now, though, that there are dead-end career decisions that you could make in terms of there's no upward mobility. If you go into grounds maintenance crew or into food preparation services, which many people do, there isn't a whole lot of room for growth. So even if you are situated incorrectly and you're inappropriately employed in that work, there's no ability for someone to say, oh, that person has way more potential. Let's put them over here. Whereas if you are to actually situate yourself, even if it's not the first job that you really want, if it's in these different areas around financial services, office and administration services, these other kinds of areas where there is actually a way of moving up and also translating your skills for future employers. It's hard for someone who is looking at you as an employer to understand how your skills as a barista translate into my needs as an HR manager, for instance. So there are ways in which we can mitigate those sorts of opportunities. The other piece of this is just also connecting it to the conversation we were having before, is we as educators don't necessarily talk to the learners after they graduate from us in order to understand all the kinds of barriers and failures they have faced in order to get to where they want to be. And so I think that's where we could do a lot better in terms of, at least instead of making it the third job, and we've actually seen through the data that for many liberal arts grads, people who've majored in the liberal arts, by their third job, they actually do make it into high wage, high demand, high skill careers, but it takes them multiple transitions before they are in that. They have to kind of mobilize and move up to get to that space. We don't do enough to understand all that fumbling and navigation that they have to do on their own in order to understand how we make it easier for learners much earlier on in the learning experience.
How can or should schools do that postgraduate data collection? I mean, there are schools that post on their websites, we have 95% of our students are in grad school or employed 6 months out, and then if you're lucky, they put an asterisk saying it's based on a 17% response rate. So schools often don't know what happens to their graduates. They know enough to be able to find them for donation requests, but they don't know that much about what they're up to. So what are some ways that schools can track that?
Yes, this is something that we're deeply invested in. We're trying to figure out ways of kind of revamping our engagement with alumni and thinking about surveys. We believe that on the front end of making an investment choice of going to college, where there's not enough of that consumer voice available to help us make better decisions, and on the back end, we also have little understanding of those outcomes. So we're trying to figure out how we engage with institutions to develop those sorts of questions.
In terms of an opportunity to build a handoff that makes sense, the idea that on one day you are supported by Career Services Office with a $50,000 budget and like 3 to 10 people, and then the next day after you graduate, you're now supported by the Alumni Office that has a multi-million-dollar budget and they plan parties and they call you for donations. The idea that those two offices are completely disconnected and have no relationship whatsoever, that should be something we start with. It's a very clear place where data collection and integrating those two offices and building a relationship where alumni could actually serve as mentors, where there are just a lot of ways we can solve these problems if we're just creative and we don't anchor and defensively to the status quo.
So the two things that we're doing, one is this idea that you create a team of individuals whose job is to stay with the students for 6 years, right? And so literally call it a dean of a class, and they have a staff, and they are devoted to those individuals from the day they come in and then 6 years forward. So if they graduate in 4 years, then they have 2 years of what we call adulting counseling available to them. If it takes 5 years, then they have a year. 6 years, then we've got to get some adulting in before you get done. Where we're struggling right now is how to make that affordable to institutions. But we have a program that we're doing now that I'm so proud of my Duke University alumni network because they agreed to mentor. We're beta testing it now. They're mentoring a group of our students, right? So they're providing additional career development support to an institution that they didn't attend, that's in their community, but it's a way in which they can engage. And so when you start to think about, to your point, about alums who have capacity, who would mentor students and engage with them, I think that's a fantastic way of doing it.
And there are some schools that actually have moved their career services offices into alumni affairs, recognizing the mentorship opportunity, oh, you're interested in this field? Let me connect you to this person who happens to be a hiring manager at that company. But those are still
Super
few and far
rare.
between.
Super rare, not public universities. You're talking private elite institutions.
The thing we have to also remember about this handoff is that as difficult as it is now, for many learners who are in that kind of 22 to 25-year-old age range of that kind of traditional college-going student population, it's not just going to be that one transition moment that we need to focus on. If we think about how technology is already reshaping the nature of work and how our lives are potentially extending because of medical advancements and just better vaccinations, all those kinds of things, as we think about a potentially longer work life, we can't expect that one difficult transition is the thing that's going to help us sort of thrive for many, many decades in our work lives. We are going to have to come back to learning in some sort of way. And it's probably not going to be with our universities. If we are fumbling it right now, why would I return as a 55-year-old male who's finding that his skills are waning in the workforce? Why would I go back to the school that already made it so difficult for me in the first place, right? So we have to think about how do we make those more seamless transitions in and out of learning and work? And if education providers aren't thinking about that as a way of thinking about alumni and career services together, then we're not being imaginative enough.
Bridget, you work with people at a lot of different schools, so this question is directed at you based on one of the Slido questions. Is there tension between the idea of an academic experience and the idea of career prep? Should colleges abandon academic ideals to pursue more practical goals? I imagine administrators and faculty might feel some of that tension occasionally. How do you navigate that?
I think you could think there's that tension, but I think underneath it all, higher ed is really about preparing people to figure out what questions they want to answer and what problems they want to solve in life. Like, I don't know, like for me, I feel like I discovered through my academic experience there were some fundamental challenges in society that I wanted to devote my life to. And I think I unpacked those in an academic experience, and the translation I'm having to do into my career. But I think that's what we want to do, is reframe it as we're helping our learners find the question that is going to be driving their life and how we equip them to become solution seekers and problem solvers. Like, if they just leave with a clear sense of the challenge they want to work on for the rest of their life, they don't need to know what their first job is. They at least have a path forward. I think that's going to be more helpful. But in terms of that dilemma, I mean, I think we should first talk about it. We should not hide it under the carpet and pretend like it's not a thing. I don't sense that it's as significant as the question might infer, but I also let's make it a safe space to talk about that. Let's include faculty in these conversations. Let's not talk about them.
I think that's also why design thinking has kind of become so popular on campuses, is because it kind of threads that needle, right? Where it's able to sort of say, well, we're teaching these different kinds of transdisciplinary skills without saying we're training you for the workforce specifically, right? We're trying to help people understand how they actually translate their skills into real-world problem-solving skills. And you see that happening kind of more on the engineering side of things, where there's a lot of schools kind of glomming onto this interesting idea of the Grand Challenges Scholars Program, where you're trying to solve these huge, massive, global, real-world problems, but there's no reason why it has to be specifically geared towards engineering. It can be towards any discipline, because no matter what problem we are trying to solve, it will by nature be transdisciplinary. So we have to be engaging learners in that way.
People are excited about doing that, right? Like, I mean, the students really get fired up about solving real world problems.
Bridget, you talked a little bit about bringing the faculty into this conversation. Where do employers fit into this conversation? One of the questions we have here is that K-12 now bemoans the influence of the private sector in shaping the modern school system. Does reshaping higher ed in line with corporate needs pose a similar risk? So what role do employers, does industry have in helping schools shape their curriculum, or at least relay to them, here's what we need in our workers? And can that go too far?
Well, I mean, I think anything can go too far, right? But I think that there's an extraordinary value in having the folks that are going to be employing your students provide you with input, right? I mean, if we're going to engage the professors more and give them an opportunity to kind of exist on multiple planes, then why not introduce a conversation between the employers and the professors so that they can begin to learn how to speak each other's language and work together?
So we're about to walk down this path for the first time, and it's a little intimidating. We don't fully know how it's going to work, but we're about to launch an employer working group where we are looking for we did all this process mapping and design sprints to try and reimagine it, figure out how really bad it was. And then now we're looking to start a conversation with employers as equal partners and say, okay, well, how can you show up with this differently? How can we Let's, for instance, re-engineer the internship to make up for privilege. Let's rethink how we do this transition. What skills and proficiencies are you seeing our graduates lacking, and how can we talk about those things? No, they shouldn't be determining the curriculum design necessarily. This is where up-to-date data about what's happening in the market is super helpful, but in the end, we are not producing workers. We're producing master learners who are capable and nimble to adapt to the workforce, but we definitely need to have a conversation with them that is, again, not defensive, takes seriously our responsibility to not just placate them and say, oh yeah, we got that, because that's how we've been in the past. So we're going to try and do this where we show up as a credible partner, and we want to reimagine not just this handoff, but also how employers, what needs to change. It's not going to be e-portfolios that they don't use when they are doing their hiring, or it's not going to be just throw out the transcript, or maybe it is, I don't know, but I think that we need to have these conversations as equal partners.
Hiring managers spend, what is the number now, like 6 seconds on an application, so viewing a long, detailed e-portfolio is probably not top of their list of activities to do. Just a reminder to the audience, there's a microphone over there. We are going to start taking audience questions in about 2 minutes, and if you don't want to stand up and ask your question in person, then you can submit it via Slido. So one thing we've touched on a little bit, but I want to dig into more, is how career services and how this handoff can, how socioeconomic factors can weigh on the handoff. So if you are working 30 hours a week and can't afford an unpaid or low-paid internship, are you then cut out of this process? And as schools rethink some of their programs, how can you make sure that they are considering equity, access to jobs, to networking? If mom and dad aren't at Goldman Sachs, how can they get started in that?
Well, this is the worthy undertaking for us, right? That's why I said reverse engineer privilege, because the way internships are done right now is frankly lazy, and it's all over the map. And we're not engaging this question about how first generation low income and students of color, how we set them up to thrive in careers at the same rate as other students. So this is something that we're diving in on, and there are all kinds of things that you could do. There are micro internships. There's some stuff that's going on where people are doing mini internships. That's one way of kind of integrating it more. But we need to have a holistic conversation about this, because the longer that we pretend this is not a thing, it becomes even more of a problem. And this has been ignored and neglected for generations, and the data is showing up. We see what happens in terms of social mobility. So I would argue that this is not something that's intentional, and that people want to be an ally in solving it, but it's a design problem, and we need to invite people into the conversation to redesign this so that we can address this, because privilege is definitely the elephant in the room.
For us, that's the motivation behind the entire system that we built the work college program, the urban work college program on, was this idea that, you know, we can do more to support the students. We can do more to introduce these things if we bake it into the academic experience and make it the common experience, right? So no one feels like they're an outlier because everyone goes through it. And that has had a wonderful effect because, you know, you don't abuse the folks in the food service line because you were once the person in the food service line, you know, and helping people find internships when they don't even know where to start. And so you start for them. And then, you know, we have a class on work where we go through these concepts. And we just think it has to become foundational to the educational experience.
The way that I like to think about it is just looking at who's getting funded today. Because if we think about sort of the inefficiencies in the market, a lot of them are tailored to this vulnerability that we have between connecting education to work. And right now we have an over $2.9 billion marketplace that we have created in the last 3 years with over 250 companies that are being funded to solve some of these problems. And there's a group out there right now that is specifically trying to teach lower income, first-gen students how to leverage social capital, like how to actually use social capital, that it's okay to get a job by knowing someone, that's okay. That's actually how most people get jobs. But the fact that there has to be a company trying to solve this problem and make it clear for learners shows that we are not necessarily doing a great job of teaching our students how to, you know, how to make these connections. There's another company out there that is reinventing the idea of the apprenticeship model called Tectonic, where you are paid on day one. As soon as you enter that apprenticeship, you are paid on day one, and it's a Department of Labor certified, registered apprenticeship. And through it, you learn the skills of software development. You are paired with a senior engineer and put on real-world projects where an employer actually gets to vet you and see how you perform before hiring you. So there are all kinds of really interesting models that are starting to emerge that take those lazy internship models and turn them into something that work for lower income students.
I want to go to a question over there.
I just wanted to hear your thoughts. Like, there's one experience that I had, and it didn't sort of promote, lucky my mother about it. It was a city year and actually in between completing my undergraduate education in the state school that I went to get my bachelor's degree in hospitality and restaurant management, changed the program, and I didn't like what they changed it to. Business and hospitality just have two different mindsets. And so I took a year off, and you talk about social capital, but I'm also wanting your thoughts. I think that being a part of the AmeriCorps like helped that 1 year experience once I graduated allow me to be able to sort of argue for a higher salary, right? Because I have the experience that I'm able to speak to. So I'm wondering your thoughts, because I think state institutions, I know private elite institutions really promote this. Luckily, my advisor knew that I was going to come back, but there was nothing in the institution to navigate this taking a break in undergrad, because everybody is focused on degree completion, and like I'm going to throw a wrench in that degree completion. And so I'm wondering your thoughts on like those type of experiences, taking a gap year to add value to your degree.
For those who didn't hear the question, it was about taking a gap year, taking some time out in the middle of school, how to navigate that and how to potentially leverage that when you do graduate.
So AmeriCorps has been an amazing experience for our students. We have used it for everything from summer job opportunities to gap year experiences to jobs after graduation. So I think it's fantastic. I think, though, and you know, Eugene, you and I talk about this type of stuff, but I think this is where the language gets interesting, right? Because for students from under-resourced communities, it's not a gap year, right? Like, I mean, you know, I've got to leave school to go get some money to be able to come back to school. And maybe if we find a way to engage the conversation more as this is a gap year and here's what we prescribe for you while you are doing these things, and just acknowledging the reality of the students. And AmeriCorps has just been fantastic for helping do that.
Next question from the audience, and then we'll go to one more from Slido.
Hi. What would be your call to action to popular tech platforms like LinkedIn, Glassdoor, and Indeed in terms of being better stakeholders in this handoff from college to career? For context, I'm actually an undocumented entrepreneur, and I do workforce consulting with schools and tech companies.
I mean, I think the good news is a lot of those platforms are actually in on some conversations that are trying to do kind of jobs data exchanges, build better job postings together. So there is a lot of innovation occurring in that space where funders, I actually just came from a meeting filled with funders talking specifically about this problem of trying to make sure when employers are asking and signaling that this is what they are looking for, that is actually what they are looking for. Because most often what you read in job postings are just sort of this litany of hard skills. And then you'll hear employers say, we need critical thinkers and great communicators, but it's nowhere in their job posting. So the disconnect there needs to be solved for on the front end, and that requires buy-in from lots of major employers to say, hey, we are going to go in on this job postings standardization and say these are the competencies that we mean. This is how we define a competency. So there is movement there, which is exciting. We're not quite there yet, but I do think in many of those conversations, many of those big platforms are in on those.
Question from Slido. Why are families not asking these questions at the college decision point? Or are they and just getting bad answers?
Well, so if you go through this process, like it's designed to be overwhelming, the process to select a college. So I just went through this with with Big Brothers, Big Sisters, and every college, every program said, oh yeah, we have a good program in that. We have a good program in that. And they're all full of it. Like, who of you has tried courses in every one of these programs? Oh, none of you. So we're very, that's a credibility problem for us. It's super overwhelming, and we invite these 18-year-olds in generally and say, here's 3,000 majors. Aren't we great? Choose, with very little information, and we don't talk about the career outcomes, like the way that we can help families make better informed choices. I mean, there's no limit to the number of things we could improve. I would say there are a lot of people who are taking this up. There are some new technology solutions they're coming up with. There's something called Me3 that's designed using graphic images to have students actually select kind of the types of experiences and things they like to do that would lead them towards the kind of major, which would lead them towards this kind of job, and here's how much it pays, and here are the programs to do. So there are things that technologists and all of us can do a better job making this process less overwhelming. I just want to say empathetically, it is legit designed to overwhelm you. And I mean, who knows that they ever make a right choice on the college choice process?
But see, I think this is fascinating to me. You're actually punished for not having more choices. So we scaled down the majors, and truth be told, we cut out a whole bunch of things that didn't wind up helping students make, I don't want to say a lot of money, but that didn't help students make a lot of money, okay? And took a lot of flack for that, right? Well, how come you don't have this major? Well, because in that major, people don't make very much money, and if you're coming from a Pell Grant background, you frankly can't afford that major, right? Oh, I mean, the amount of criticism that we took behind those decisions was staggering. Now, I still think they were the right decisions, but I also think that in this country, we have told people that they can do whatever they want to do, and it's going to be okay, right? And it's not. I mean, I'm always fascinated. The question that I'd like to see answered when we talk about people who are underemployed isn't just what you majored in, but what were your grades, right? Because if you don't perform well in whatever you study, you're not going to have the desired outcome. So we have to have honest, intentional conversations with people. And we do have to make it easier, right? I mean, because FAFSA is overwhelming. I mean, it's just absolutely overwhelming. There has to be an easier way of determining if you need financial aid. Okay, I don't know what it is, but I know that's not it. So the process is overwhelming. FAFSA is overwhelming. It's like an endurance contest. And we just need to decide that if this is important to us, let's make the system streamlined and easier for people to succeed with them.
I think the one thing that I might just sort of push back on there, and I don't know which majors you ended up deciding to cut, but one of the favorite sort of dumping grounds is sort of the liberal arts major, just because I think a lot of policymakers in particular tend to look at it as sort of a valueless degree because they can't see the immediate ROI. And on the flip side, you have a lot of academics saying, don't worry, in 20 years, the ROI is so obvious, right? They're gonna be great. But the data just doesn't bear that out. Liberal arts majors actually do end up doing quite well. Do they ever meet and match their STEM peers? No. But they do accelerate their earnings much later on in their 30s and 40s faster than any other major out there. So it's important for us to understand that there are other measures of understanding, that kind of value, and also and understanding really what kind of sort of levels of satisfaction that they have, even if they aren't maybe earning as much as they could be. So it's just that's where we have to temper our our sort of our desire to kind of go black and white, because one of the I just lost my train of thought, so I'll come back to it.
Well, so I would explain it this way. I was a government major at one of the most liberal arts of the liberal arts colleges ever, right? And I never thought about what am I going to do, because I knew I was going to law school, right? So I saw it as prepping me for law school. But I think we're having two slightly different conversations here, right? I'm having the conversation from the standpoint of people who have grown up in under-resourced communities and cannot afford life, right? This is not a middle-class conversation, right? I'm going to war for those individuals. Mm-hmm. And what I'm telling you is that I think we have to look at poverty from the standpoint of immigration, right? We're going to migrate you out of poverty, all right? And I will just use my own personal story. My father didn't go to college, okay? He grew up in a single-family home in New Orleans, Louisiana. My mother went to college. My mother's mother went to college. And the combination of the two created a really interesting home life for me. My father was an entrepreneur. He and my mother partnered together to build an incredibly successful restaurant business. My father came home every single day smelling like barbecue, right? He bought me out of coming home every single day smelling like barbecue, right? He made that sacrifice. So in one generation, his side of the family went from a man who never stepped foot on a college campus to a son who's a college president, right? He made that sacrifice, right? That sacrifice allowed me to make different choices. But my mother, who was a social worker, who ran a social work agency in Chicago, Illinois, forbid my sister and I to become social workers. And she sat down and she had an economic conversation. She said, people are graduating from 4 years of college and we are offering them $13,000 a year. She said, and it's not enough. She said, but this is what it is. If you know this information, and if you know people cannot afford this, then you have to help them make different choices. And so we're not having a middle class conversation at Paul Quinn College. We are speaking to those who aren't often spoken to.
So real quick, sorry. I didn't mean to intend that it was in any way some sort of middle class conversation. What I did want to connect it to is that the future of work conversation going on today is demanding these skills that overlap quite extraordinarily with liberal arts competencies. Absolutely. And so that is the concern, especially as we see way more learners actually moving into career-oriented majors, which is great. They're moving into STEM, healthcare, and business, but they're also the number of history majors in the last 10 years has dropped by 45%. So what does it mean if we know that the increasing demand is there for these skills, and yet we see more and more people kind of removing from that? How do we make sure we embed these kinds of liberal arts competencies into all sorts of programming? Well,
and that's our whole so our reality-based education model is based on the liberal arts, right? reading across a curriculum, like writing across a curriculum, every course requires you to write papers. That's grammar. That's the most fundamental of the liberal arts skills. The concept of everyone giving public presentations, that's speaking across the curriculum, that's the liberal arts tradition of rhetoric, the second of the most basic liberal arts competencies. The project-based, like team-based, project-based learning is teaching critical thinking, which is reasoning across a curriculum, which is the third of the most fundamental liberal arts. All we did was say, if we were creating liberal arts today, what should they look like? Now, since we asked the question, we dubbed them the Quinnite arts, right? Because we branded them, so we took them over, right? But the point is, I agree with you 100%, but I think you have to push and go even further with the question.
I want to get to a couple more audience questions. We're going lightning round here. We've got a little over 4 minutes left, so go ahead.
I'm going to ask my question really quickly. I'm a graduate of a historically black college and currently an assistant professor at the University of Texas at San Antonio. And given the things that you all have talked about up there on the panel, I'm wondering, because HBCUs have different historical missions, what does a University Innovation Alliance look like in the context of historically black colleges and universities?
Well, yeah, because you're kicking it off, right?
Yeah.
So our alliance is just a group of universities who united around a sense of urgency and decided that going it alone was a waste of time, energy, and money. We wanted to try and increase the number of high-quality degrees and specifically work on how we were underserving low-income first-gen students of color. And we also wanted to find our people who believe in collaboration as the vehicle. And we found Michael, who is now creating a whole consortium based on this same idea that you can move faster together. And you can now talk about it.
So we are moving faster together. No, so we're building consortium of urban work colleges. And the idea is this model is most capable of being replicated by small schools that have unique, closely knit communities, right? So as a historically black college, we looked around and said, like, what are the ways that we can work together? So part of our, and we were fortunate enough to get a grant that came through UIA to start building a consortium. And the first partner in the consortium is Wilberforce, right? I expect, I'm not gonna call publicly the other schools because the conversations are being had, but I think you have to work together, right? I mean, none of us have the magic bullet. Like, this is gonna require everyone to work collectively.
Last question and serious lightning round this time.
Okay, just very quickly, I just want to make the point that a liberal arts education includes STEM, so that students are learning things across the curriculum, which is what you're doing, and in a very important way, I think. So that's one thing. The second thing I want to say is an issue that we're not addressing is schools are responding to incredible unequal access to resources across higher education, and you're doing a fabulous job with no resources. So part of the solution has to be that as a society, we start supporting people at the bottom half of the institutions across America so that they can get a better education.
I think I love you, by the way. Thank you.
And it's a shame if you have to tell your students that they can't go into social work because as a society, we don't pay social workers enough to do an incredibly important public function.
Yes, I agree 100%.
I agree.
And I just want to also make the obvious point that as we're all replaced by robots, boy, those liberal arts degrees are going to look real good, right? Like those are the thinking and being a creative person and thinking about the challenge of society. Those are the things that robots can't probably do for us. So we're going to want to not try and get rid of things with short-sightedness.
Two of the areas that are going to be in highest demand in the future are in teaching, like elementary school teaching, and home health aides, two of the lowest paying areas of work. So this comment of, we have to have a different social contract because we can't just push everyone out. This is going to be critical for the future of work.
Yeah,
I just feel like I need to defend something. I think I'm being cast as the guy that says don't do low paying jobs, right? Let me be very, very, I'm just messing with you, Michelle. Let me be very, very clear, right? One, I do think people should make a lot of money. Or I think you should have that opportunity. Okay, I think that we can't just have the luxury of saying those of us who make money telling other people that they shouldn't make money. I think people should make money. I think you should be able to study the things you are passionate about. Now, where I actually am different is I think if you study the things you are passionate about, you find a way to be great at them. And when you are great at things, the money does follow. All right, so I fundamentally believe that. The way that we teach our students to hedge that bet is to double major. Right? Double major. I mean, if you love the arts, I think it's fantastic. How about you major in performing art? And let's say you want to dance. Major in dance and double major in business, right? You have the ability to monetize your gift. Don't hand that off to somebody else. So I am not against, but I'm having a real conversation with people who need to be able to support more than just themselves.
Thank you guys all so much for this. We do have to end now, but thank you all for coming out.